Hi, I'm Mark Crawley and welcome to Diversity Connect. So today's session is going to be our Access to Work Part 2. So we have Part 1 on the platform, which talks a little bit more about what is access to work and the process and some pros and cons and a few other pieces of advice. Today, what we're going to focus on is my experience of access to work. It was interesting. I enjoyed, I think, the simplicity of certain parts of the application, etc. But there was other things in here that we'd love to give you a little bit of feedback on. So let's get started. And just in case anyone is watching this one before Part 1, what is Access to Work? So Access to Work is a government-funded scheme in the UK. It provides support for disabled people and those who with health conditions to start or stay in work. This obviously includes neurodivergent individuals. It also offers grant practical support tailored to individual needs. But what it does is it aims to remove barriers that individuals face in the workplace. In the previous session, we cover the unique name of this service, Access to Work, because ironically, you actually need to be in work to access to work. So it's one of those that supports you when you're in a job or about to start a job with a guaranteed start date. Unfortunately, what it doesn't do is provide any support to try to get into work. There's other initiatives around that, but obviously they're not as maybe as well known as Access to Work. So yeah, it's an interesting name and one that I've never really understood. But ironically, you have to be in a job to be able to use the service. So why I applied? So why did I apply for Access to Work? So I'm very early stage of my ADHD journey, on the waiting list for a diagnosis. The diagnosis part for me isn't as important, but you know what? I may as well be on the waiting list for it. What it has given me, though, is a real opportunity to try and understand the way I think, some of the things that I often find challenging, but also I think some of the things that I also excel at, right? And so yeah. My ADHD journey may be another video where we'll talk about it in a bit more detail, but for today, this is why I applied for Access to Work. And one of the other reasons is that some of the aspects of support that I probably need, like coaching, etc. It's helpful as a small business for obviously someone else to absorb the costs. So the government provides support for that, which is great. And a couple of things that I really needed, I believed, was coaching and virtual assistant support based around organisation, capacity, the fact that I can only work on certain times a day, or I find it more useful to work on certain times a day. And just again, to manage expectations, I applied for Access to Work in January 2024. So we are talking 14 months ago now. So it was a fair old time ago. So the application itself, I think we touched on this in the last video, but there's the link to apply. You can apply by online, phone, or post. I submitted mine online. You need to be working, or you're a sole trader or a limited company owner. So in my instance, I'm the director of a limited company. The questions that they ask during the application, and we're not going to go through the application itself, but they focus on needs and any condition. So they will talk a little bit more about what you need, why you need it. They don't focus too much on things like diagnosis or anything like that. Some people feel it useful to mention it. With me, I just focused around, this is what I need, this is what I struggle with, and these are the type of things that may help me. The form is user-friendly, but it can be a little bit triggering, particularly as you need to be very open around what you're doing. But as I mentioned already, you do not need a formal diagnosis if you're neurodivergent. One tip I would definitely give, because again, it doesn't really give you a copy or send you a copy of your answers afterwards, is to save a copy before you submit. So it's really important. You'll get, I believe, on the last page, a summary of all of the questions you've been asked, and then you're asked if you want to save it. Worst case, literally just cut and paste it and put it into a Word document or a Google Doc or something like that. So, but yeah, the application itself, I found relatively straightforward. So we, as an offering a service for Tier 3 members at Diversity Connect, we offer you some support around completing this document. We have someone that we use who's fantastic, who used to work for Access to Work. So again, if you need a little bit of assistance around this, let us know. But I found that the document was relatively straightforward. I think it helped I weren't asking for a lot. If you're asking for a lot and you have some very complex requirements, then it can maybe be a little bit trickier. So in terms of updates, so I submitted my application in January 2024. And once the application has been submitted, you get a confirmation email letter. But as I mentioned, you don't get a copy of the things that you've requested, or a copy of the form. You can phone that number for any updates, and you will have a reference number on your confirmation email or letter. But your expectations need to be managed that it could take up to 9 months, and it's unlikely you'll hear anything for at least 6 months. So I think once you've submitted it, I would definitely put a calendar reminder to follow up in maybe 6 months' time. I believe there's some work to try and help this at the moment, including outsourcing some of the assessments and services. But we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. The initial conversation. So after my application in January, the first update I actually got was in August. Right, so what is that? 7-8 months afterwards. And it was more logistical at that point. As a company owner, I had to prove my company was still in business. There's obviously a requirement for you to be in work, and if you're not in work, then to be a sole trader or a company owner, and I had to prove that. I also had to prove that my my personal earnings hit the right criteria. I believe this is in case you have, say, for example, a dormant limited company, and you obviously try to apply in that case. But it's interesting to see that I had to try and justify all of that. I had an initial screening call with my case manager. So someone reached out to me, and that was more of a case of they were happy with some of the information. I think they asked me a couple of extra questions, and then they said that it was going to be passed on to an assessor. And we'll talk a little bit more about the assessor in a second. In this instance, and I don't believe this has always been the case, the assessor worked for a private company. I won't mention the name if that's okay, but that was arranged for late September. So by then we are obviously talking around 9 months at that point, before we actually sit down with someone to talk a little bit more about what I need. But when I sat down with the assessor, what was, I suppose, reassuring at that point was that I'd been told that I was eligible for Access to Work. So the assessment itself. So I had an interview over a video call, and you are asked what you struggle with and what you need to be prepared. What I would say is the assessor I had, and I'm not prejudging, but it didn't feel like they were well versed around neurodiversity. So there was very much around maybe some of the physical things. Did I need a chair? Did I need a raised desk? Those type of areas. And I mentioned that I didn't. There's also, in this instance, I found a tendency to try and push me to pre-arranged offerings, and I never really felt like I was being listened to. So, for example, at one point they said, "Well, what do you need?" I said, "Well, look, I at the moment, the way that I'm learning to work, and when it's most effective for me, means that I could probably benefit from a virtual assistant to try and help me with my organisation. As someone with ADHD, I do struggle a little bit with organisation. Alongside that, I could use some coaching just to try and make sure that I understand a little bit more about again the way my brain works, etc. So again, I think that would be really useful. So yeah, but however, it didn't feel like I was really listened to. I was sort of shoehorned into, I think, maybe needing some mental health support, and my experience was poor, I think, because of that. So what you don't really get is any summary of what was discussed at that point after the meeting. I didn't anyway. And I think that was a little bit disappointing. What you do realise later on is that the Access to Work themselves do get a report which summarizes the conversation. But there were certain things I asked for that didn't come through. What I would say is that this is arguably the most important part of the process, and I wish I'd known a little bit more about it before I went in. What I could have asked for is a bit more about what will be covered, what's going to be discussed, what is the assessor going to need, and just maybe having a slightly more articulate way of saying what I needed. And maybe I should have been a little bit stronger around it. What I was very clear about afterwards, though, was the type of things that I'd asked for. And this is what I thought I'd agreed. So I thought I'd agreed 12 hours per week of virtual assistant support, 12 one-hour sessions for ADHD coaching. What was suggested in addition to this, certainly I thought was in addition to this, was a self-organization app subscription, which I've tried a few times, those type of things, and they don't really work for me. I just use Google and it's quite cool. And mental health support, but not really detailed about what that would be at this stage or anything like that. So the grant itself is calculated based around what you ask for, the assessor's report, and when they, in terms of what you asked for, in this instance, the outsourced organisation got some quotes from providers, for 3 quotes each for the services that they recommended, to try and give an estimate around how much these would cost. And what it was say, if one is £900, one is £700, and one is £800, they'll probably go with the middle, which is £800. So that's the idea, really, to try and make sure that you're given an allowance which they believe is in line with what services cost. So what I actually received, what I actually got, and this is actually from the document, is I got, and it's a misprint, it's 26 hours of ADHD and neurodivergent coaching. So for £700, it's actually that's actually 10 hours, which I was granted in the end at £70 an hour. I also got 3 lots of 2-hour virtual mental health awareness training sessions, which I found a bit strange. Still don't know what that is now. Still haven't applied for that. And Global Tasks, which was the platform. Now, it's obvious that Global Tasks are an approved provider to Access to Work, because that seemed very, very straightforward to get. And obviously there's training around this as well, around using this application. So at the moment, that's what I was asked for. So you'll probably recall in the previous one that I asked for VA support, which I thought was agreed in the meeting. So, but there was no mention of that on the form. This is the allowance, or the total cost of the allowance. Now, the annual cap around Access to Work support is £65,000. So my support is obviously well underneath that, but there's obviously certain things in there that I believe we discussed, but obviously weren't given in the end, and also had some things that I didn't actually really need. So how you receive the services, and once you get that form, you have to create an account on the Government Access to Work portal, and that's where you upload invoices from your provider. So for example, for ADHD coaching, I've got someone that I've been using or want to use. That person will give me invoices and we'll upload them, and that person will get paid directly. You can actually use who you wish, apart from obviously the annual subscription there, which has been pre-allocated for the organisation app. You don't have to use the recommended suppliers. You can actually use people that you want to, but they have to be within budget. You can't go over budget. So please bear in mind, and I've mentioned already, that assessors may try to steer you towards certain providers, which is nothing wrong with that. If there's you have no idea where to start, and it's great. But if you've got some ideas about who you want to use already, then just make sure that you're ready to sort of push back or to navigate that conversation. So the overall experience for me so far. So the pros are that I found the application quite straightforward. My actual caseworker, once they'd been in initial contact, was very responsive. And I received coaching, which I asked for. Now, it was a couple of hours less than I was maybe looking for. I think the rate of coaching, or the rate that they were looking to pay at £70 an hour, is probably a little bit under what we see on a day-to-day basis from some of the coaches that we work with. But these were, I suppose, the benefits around this. The cons, right? So I didn't have, I would say, an amazing experience here. And when I've spoken to other people, it's pretty, there's a lot of things that I think there's areas for opportunity to improve. I only received really one request out of the three things that I asked for. And I also received three things that I didn't ask for, right? The assessor, I think, was the biggest challenge here, was ill-informed, ableist, tried to lean it towards physical disabilities, didn't really understand a lot about neurodiversity, and obviously had a predefined idea about what they were looking to try and offer. And we mentioned already about a big push to certain providers. My award letter, although I filled it in online, was actually sent in a post, which I didn't receive. So I had to chase that, and it come through as a PDF. And it took nearly a year in total, all in. So, yeah, probably not the flagship experience for access to work in my instance, but I thought it was important I share. Of course, look, I'm happy to talk about this a little bit more, happy to have a discussion with anyone of our members to tell them a little bit more, and then also just pass on any tips that I can. I suppose, look, my key advice really here, and bearing in mind we're not access to work experts, this is my personal experience, is definitely do the application. I think it's really important to get an application in. It's something which the government do offer still, who knows for how much longer, and this obviously takes a while, so just get it done, get it in. However, please manage your expectations around this. It's really important to make sure that you understand it's going to take a while, and in my instance, I didn't get everything I was asking for. I am challenging the lack of virtual assistant support, but no update as yet. So what I would do is maybe record or use a note taker on the video interview that you have. I think it's really important to try and make sure that what's said in that interview you have some sort of proof of, because that was probably the key. I think all of the other things I could have probably navigated, but the fact that I didn't get what I requested, or it's even brought up in the documentation, just really frustrated me a little bit. And then obviously it becomes quite faceless after that. It's quite difficult to get hold of your caseworker afterwards. It's quite difficult to get hold of escalations, and obviously at that point you already have the assessment, which has already taken a long time. Maybe have a list of providers you want to use. You don't have to articulate those, but there may be some people or companies that you're really keen on using, so just have those in the back of your mind. But of course, look, just be incredibly clear about what you need and why. We can help with this. It's one of the services we offer to Tier 3 members, and it's really worth doing. We have someone who can navigate and complete the form with you and try to move your application forward. So that would be my advice based on my experience. Obviously, we'd love to hear any other tips. So next steps, obviously, as always, we have a post about this session in questions, and please add in the additional comments, suggestions. Love to hear about everyone's experience with access to work. Obviously, we have direct messaging. You can, and if you have a situation you'd like advice on, and I'll try to do another update session soon. So, for example, if I do move my conversation forward with regard to VA support, I'll be sure to share it. But I think at the moment, I'm going to utilize obviously what I've been given, and make sure that that those things hopefully will help me. But the virtual assistant support was probably the biggest omission. But thank you so much again for watching this video today. It's nice to be able to share this experience with others, because it was one of those I was really interested in seeing how it was, because we obviously suggest it to a lot of our candidates and a lot of the employees that we talk to. So it's one of those areas that I think it was good to see it firsthand. I do think it's really a service that's heavily stretched at the moment. So maybe I caught it right at the apex of that. But look, let's see how it moves in terms of efficiency, etc., going forward. But again, thank you for watching today, and look forward to seeing you on the next video. Thank you.
Thank you for watching. Make sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe. And scan the QR code to join the Diversa Connect community.